wanted to offer prayers, wanted to encourage government in proceeding with what they believe is a necessary step. So we had a very good consultation, but they also briefed us about the various steps that they are going to be taking as religious leaders in their various denominations, whether it is mosques, whether it is synagogues, whether it is temples and churches. We felt very comforted to have had the breakfast meeting with our religious leaders who were able to come to Pretoria, and they gave all thumbs to the lockdown, but also blessed the prayer session that they encouraged us to launch at 6 o'clock this evening, between 6 and 6:30, that South Africans are called upon to have a prayer session of, say, about 5 minutes. Pray for the nation, but particularly pray for those who are either affected by the coronavirus in the way of being infected or having family who are infected, who are either in isolation or in quarantine or in hospital, but also pray for the nation as the nation goes through this very challenging time, unprecedented in the history of our country, that we have a complete lockdown given rise to by a disease that is continuing to have a devastating impact. We now have more than 900 people who are infected, as the minister told me, and we fear that it might rise even much further than that. So it was good to start the day off and on the eve of the lockdown to have our religious leaders. And thereafter we had a meeting of the African Union Bureau, which is the chairperson of the AU, which is myself, and the other deputy chairpersons, being the president of the DRC, President Tshisekedi, the president of Mali, President Keita, the president of Kenya, President Kenyatta, and the outgoing chair of the AU being President Al-Sisi of Egypt. We had, as well as the African Union Commission chairperson, Chairperson Faki Mahamat. So we had a wonderful session, which I convened to enable the continent to have a clear position on dealing with COVID-19. And we found that the numbers that are affected on the African continent are rising almost every day. Their numbers have not yet reached the level at which South Africa is. We are the most affected country, but nonetheless they are rising. And we received a report from the CDC, which is the Continental Disease Control Center, which was able to give us a detailed report about the incidence of the virus in various countries. We then agreed that as a continent, we needed to approach this COVID-19 in a unified way, and agreed that no single country on the African continent should try to tackle this alone. We should have a coordinated approach. We should work together as much as we possibly can through cooperation. We should also share information about what each of us are doing, and we should heighten communication so that we know exactly what each country is doing about COVID-19. We also agreed that we need to set up regional control centers, task forces rather, so that SADC has its own task force, ECOWAS also has its own, Eastern Africa has its own, Northern Africa and Central Africa. So all the 5 regions of the continent should have their own task forces that will work together, and that our ministers of health should be in those task forces and work together. We also agreed that we needed to call on the world, particularly your more developed economies, to come to Africa's assistance from an economic point of view, so that they provide stimulus, so that we are able to have the resources to support our economies, but also to allow the manufactured goods that we need from various countries, such as medical supplies, to be imported into Africa. They should not close Africa off. Lastly, and more importantly, we decided to raise a fund, the Africa Coronavirus Fund, Solidarity Fund, if you like, which will help the CDC, the Control Disease Center, but which would also help countries that are going to be in greatest need. We were able immediately to raise $17 million amongst the various countries. So Africa now has a clear position of being able to address this disease from a unified point of view. We've just finished a meeting of the G20. The G20 countries were convened by King Salman of Saudi Arabia, who are the current president of the G20, to discuss COVID-19. And all countries are united that we've got to do everything we can to save lives, to also act in solidarity with countries that are badly affected, but also to support the economies of the various countries. And we as Africa have called upon the countries of the G20, particularly your more developed economies, to support stimulus packages for Africa, to have debt relief from the World Bank, IMF, so that countries are then able to halt their interest payments, so that they are able to focus on fighting the coronavirus. It was a wonderful meeting, and I think the decisions that have been taken will in due course be implemented. But the G20 were united in saying we've got to fight the disease, save lives, and support economies that are under stress, and we put Africa's case forward quite strongly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll take one question. We're late, guys. Peter?
Yeah, Mr. President, sorry. There's been a lot of criticism about some G20 countries for fighting amongst themselves over who was responsible for the coronavirus, and a call on countries to unite in fighting it, including through sharing their research results on vaccinations. Was there some agreement on that, and if so, would South Africa participate in a global effort to find a vaccine?
Well, our approach to South Africa is that there's no use fighting on who caused it, where it came from. We have a disease that is spreading throughout the world. And if anything, we've now got to unite, close ranks as countries of the world, and fight this common enemy. We are in a war situation, and when you're at war, it does not pay any benefit to start fighting amongst yourselves and shooting your own soldiers. We've got to unite, confront this enemy, and we are supportive of efforts that are going to lead to sharing of information, working together from a research point of view, so that we combine resources as much as we possibly can. So in the G20 meeting, this view was articulated. There was no dissent amongst the countries. There was no dissent, from even those countries that may have been blaming each other. So I got a sense that we have got a united and unified approach and position on this. So I'm confident that from a G20 point of view, we're facing a common enemy and we've got to work together.
Thank you very much.
Let's hear him.
Could I ask, one question? Alex Winning from Reuters. You mentioned that as Africa, you spoke to the G20 and you said that you were looking for support for stimulus packages for African economies. Was any agreement reached at the meeting, and was this the proposal that was made by Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed for both relief on debt repayments and also for up to 150 billion rand of support, $150 billion.
Well, he wasn't there. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia was not there to make the proposal. We articulated Africa's position that we need economic support, we need a stimulus. We didn't mention a figure, because sometimes you mention a figure, and if you don't hit it, it becomes a failure. So we said Africa needs support at an economic level, a stimulus support, but that was also supported, although not real sort of hard-core decision was taken on this. The sentiment and the views and the position was supported by a number of countries. Germany supported that, France supported that, Canada supported that, Russia supported that. So you have a number of countries in the world that are very sympathetic to Africa's situation, bearing in mind that Africa is still, if you like, at the morning level of this virus. China is already in the sunset because they've done a lot to overcome it, and Europe is at midday. So we are still at the beginning stages, and so therefore we will need a lot of support, particularly because our health systems on the continent are also challenged, and a lot of support that needs to be brought to bear to Africa so that we can overcome the coronavirus disease. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
We've got to go and see the police now. And the soldiers.
Watch out.
All right, so we're going to come out of that now. That's President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking about three very important meetings that he had. And he said that it started, of course, grateful for the breakfast meeting that he had with church leaders ahead of a call for prayer later tonight from about 6 o'clock this evening to pray for the nation and for all those already affected by the COVID-19 virus. He says at this stage he believes that more than 900 people have now been infected. And of course, there are fears that this number will rise. The second meeting that he had, he says, was with the AU Bureau. He's the chairperson, of course, and he convened this meeting to make sure that as a continent that there's a clear position of how to move forward. He says numbers are rising across the continent, and he said that they agreed that there was a need to address COVID-19 as a collective with a coordinated approach, sharing information and heightening communication. He also said that regional task forces should be set up, for example, in SADC, the East Africa Community, ECOWAS, so that all 5 regions should have task teams led by health ministers and all working together. He also said that they agreed as the AU Bureau to look to the developed nations to come and assist the continent's economies, things like stimulus packages and incentives. He said that an Africa Coronavirus Fund had been set up, and so far $17 million had already been raised. He said that these G20, he also met with G20 countries again online, and they've all agreed that we need to do everything that we can to save lives, to support each other's countries and show solidarity to those that have had massive losses as a result of this COVID-19. He talked about stimulus packages for Africa, incentives to support countries particularly under stress. So it seems a lot of cooperation taking place, not just here in South Africa, led by church leaders and other spiritual groupings, but also across the continent with the African Union and the G20, the globe completely focused on finding solutions for this next period that Africa finds itself in. All right, we'll have more for you still to come. Stay with us as we take a quick break.